Well, there's one bit of mystery left, which I'd like to get rid of right now, and that's that we've been blithely doing things like conses, assuming there's always another one. That we've been doing these things like carring and coutering and assuming that we had some idea how this could be done. Now, indeed, we said that that's equivalent to having procedures. Okay? But that doesn't really solve the problem because the procedures need all sorts of complicated mechanisms like environment structures and things like that to work. And those were ultimately made out of conses in the model that we had. So that really doesn't solve the problem. And now, the problem here is the glue that data structures are made out of. What kind of possible thing could it be? And we've been showing you things like a machine, a computer that has a controller and some registers and maybe a stack. And we haven't said anything about, for example, its larger memory. And I think that's what we have to worry about right now. But just to make it perfectly clear that this is an inessential, purely implementational thing, I'd like to show you, for example, how you could do it all with numbers. That's an easy one. A famous fellow by the name of Gödel, a logician of the 1930s, invented a very clever way of encoding the complicated expressions as numbers. For example, I'm not saying exactly what Gödel's scheme is because he didn't use words like const. He had other kinds of ways of combining to make expressions. But he said, I'm going to assign a number to every algebraic expression. And the way I'm going to manufacture these numbers is by combining the numbers of the parts. So, for example, what we were doing in our world, we could say that if objects are represented by numbers, then const of x and y could be represented by 2 to the x times 3 to the y. Because then we could extract the parts. We could say, for example, that then car of, say, x is the number of factors of 2 in x. Okay? And of course, coutter is the same thing. It's the number of factors of 3 in x. Now, this is a perfectly reasonable scheme, except for the fact that the numbers rapidly get to be much larger in number of digits than the number of protons in the universe. So there's no easy way to use this scheme other than a theoretical one. On the other hand, there are other ways of representing these things. We have been thinking in terms of little blocks and boxes, right? We've been thinking about our const structures as looking sort of like this. Okay? They're little pigeonholes with things in them. And of course, we arrange them in little trees. I wish that the semiconductor manufacturers would supply me with something appropriate for this, but actually, what they do supply me with is a linear memory. Memory is sort of a big pile of pigeonholes like this, each of which can hold a certain sized object, a fixed size object. So, for example, a complicated list with 25 elements won't fit in one of these. However, each of these is indexed by an address. So that the address might be 0 here, 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, and so on. That we write these down as numbers is unimportant. What matters is that they're distinct, and there's a way to get to the next one. Okay? And inside of each of these, we can stuff something in each of these pigeonholes. So that's what memory is like for those of you who haven't built a computer. Now, the problem is, how are we going to impose on this type of structure this nice tree structure? Well, it's not very hard, and there have been numerous schemes involved in this. The most important one is to say, well, assuming that the semiconductor manufacturer allows me to arrange my memory so that one of these pigeonholes is big enough to hold the address of another, Okay, I have it made. Now it actually has to be a little bit bigger because I have to also install or store some information as to a tag which describes the kind of thing that's there, and we'll see that in a second. And of course, if the semiconductor manufacturer doesn't arrange it so that I can do that, then of course I can, with some cleverness, arrange combinations of these to fit together in that way. So we're going to have to imagine imposing this complicated tree structure on our nice linear memory. If we look at the first still store, we see a classic scheme for doing that. Okay, it's a standard way of representing list structures in a linear memory. What we do is we divide this memory into two parts, an array called the cars and an array called the cooters. Now, whether those happen to be sequential addresses or whatever, it's not important. That's somebody's implementation details. But there are two arrays here, linear arrays, indexed by sequential indices like this. What is stored in each of these pigeonholes is a typed object. And what we have here are types which begin with letters like P, standing for a pair, or N, standing for a number, or E, standing for an empty list, the end of the list. And so if we wish to represent an object like this, the list beginning with 1, 2, and then having a 3 and a 4 as its second and third elements, a list containing a list as its first part, and then two numbers as the second and third parts, then of course we draw it sort of like this these days in box and pointer notation. And you see these are the three cells that have as their car pointer the object which is either 1, 2, or 3, or 4. And then, of course, the 1, 2, the car of this entire structure, is itself a substructure which contains a sublist like that. And what I'm about to do is put down places which I'm going to assign indices, like this 1 over here, represents the index of this cell. But that pointer that we see here is a reference to the pair of pigeonholes in the cars and the cooters that are labeled by 1 in my linear memory down here. So if I wish to impose this structure on my linear memory, what I do is I say, oh yes, why don't we drop this into cell 1? So I pick 1, there's 1, okay? And that says that its car, I'm going to assign it to be a pair, it's a pair, which is an index 5. And the cooter, which is this one over here, is a pair which I'm going to stick into place 2, P2. And take a look at P2. Oh yes, well P2 is a thing whose car is the number 3. So that's, you see, an N3. And whose cooter over here is a pair which lives in place 4. So that's what this P4 is. P4 is a number whose value is 4 in its car, and whose cooter is an empty list right there, and that ends it. So this is the traditional way of representing this kind of binary tree in a linear memory. Now, next question, of course, that we might want to worry about is just a little bit of implementation. That means that when I write procedures of the form assigned A, not procedures, lines of register machine code of the form assigned A, the car of fetch of B, what I really mean is addressing these elements. Okay? And so we're going to think of that as an abbreviation for it. Now, of course, in order to write that down, I'm going to introduce some sort of structure called a vector. Okay, and we're going to have something which will reference a vector, just so we can write it down, which takes the name of the vector, or I don't think the name is the right word, which takes the vector and the index, and I have to have a way of setting one of those with something called a vector set. I don't really care. But let's look, for example, at then that kind of implementation of car and cdr. Okay? So for example, if I happen to have a register B which contains the index, the typed index of a pair, okay, therefore it is the pointer to a pair, then I can take the car of that, okay, and I write this down, I might put that in register A. What that really is a representation of the assigned to A, the value of vector reffing, or array indexing if you will, or something, the cars object, whatever that is, with the index B. And similarly for cdr. And we can do the same thing for assignment to data structures, if we need to do that sort of thing at all. It's not too hard to build that. Well, now the next question is, how are we going to do allocation? I mean, every so often I say I want a cons. Now, conses don't grow on trees, or maybe they should, but I have to have some way of getting the next one. I have to have some idea of, is there memory that is unused that I might want to allocate from? And there are many schemes for doing this, and the particular thing I'm showing you right now is not essential. However, it's convenient and has been done many times. There's one scheme called the free list allocation scheme. And what that means is that all of the free memory that there is in the world is linked together in a linked list, just like all the other stuff. And whenever you need a free cell to make a new cons, you grab the first one, make the free list be the cdr of it, and then allocate that. And so what that looks like is something like this. Here we have the free list. Here we have the free list starting in in 6. Okay? And what that is a pointer off to say 8. So what it says is this one is free and the next one is in 8. This one is free and the next one is in 3. The next one that's free. That one's free and the next one is in 0. That one's free and the next one's in 15. Something like that. We can imagine having such a structure. Given that we have something like that, then it's possible to just get one when you need it. Okay? And so a program for doing cons, this is what cons might turn into. To assign to a register A the result of consing a B onto a C, the value that's contained in B and the value contained in C, what we have to do is get the current head of the free list, make the free list be its cdr. Then we have to change the cars to be the thing we're making up to be in A to be the B, the thing in B, and we have to change the cdrs of the thing that's in A to be C. So, and then what we have in A is the right new frob, whatever it is, the object that we want. Now, there's a little bit of a cheat here that I haven't told you about, which is somewhere around here I haven't set the type of the thing that the type of the thing that I'm consing up to be a pair, and I ought to. So there should be some sort of bits here are being set, and I just haven't written that down. Okay. We could have arranged it, of course, for the free list to be made out of pairs, and so then there's no problem with that. But that's sort of, again, an inessential detail of the way some particular programmer or architect or whatever might manufacture his machine or Lisp system. So, for example, just looking at this, to allocate, given that I had already the structure that you saw before, supposing I wanted to allocate a new cell, which is going to be representation of the list 112, where already 1, 2 was the car of the list we were playing with before. Well, that's not so hard. I stored that one in 1, so P1 is the representation of this. This is P5. That's going to be the cdr of this. Now we're going to pull something off the free list, but remember the free list started at 6. The new free list after this allocation is 8. Is a free list beginning in 8. And of course, in 6 now we have a number 1, which is what we wanted, with its cdr being the pair starting in location 5. And that's no big deal. So the only problem really remaining here is, well, I don't have an infinitely large memory. I mean, if I do this for a little while, say, for example, supposing it takes me a microsecond to do a const, and if I have 1,000,000 const memory, then I'm only going to run out in a second, and that's pretty bad. So what we do to prevent that disaster, that ecological disaster, talk about right after questions. Are there any questions? Yes?
In the environment diagrams that we were drawing, we would use the body of procedures, and you would eventually wind up with things that were no longer useful in that structure.
Yes, ma'am.
How is that represented in this type of
two problems here. Okay, one you were asking is that material becomes useless. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in a second. That has to do with how to prevent ecological disasters. Right? If I make a lot of garbage, I have to somehow be able to clean up after myself. Okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. The other question you're asking is how you represent the environments, I think.
Yes.
Okay, and the environment structures can be represented in arbitrary ways. There are lots of them. I mean, here I'm just telling you about list cells. Of course, every real system has vectors of arbitrary length as well as the vectors of length 2, which represent list cells. And the environment structures that one uses in a professionally written Lisp system tend to be vectors, which contain a number of elements approximately equal to the number of arguments, a little bit more because you need certain glue. Okay, and so you remember the environment's made out of frames. The frames are constructed by applying a procedure. In doing so, an allocation is made of a place which is the number of arguments long plus some glue that gets linked into a chain. Okay, it's just like algol at that level. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, and let's take a short break.